So to get right into our show here today, we want to start with the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal, who is one of the more well-known political prisoners here in the United States, whose case continues to be ongoing. The struggle for his freedom continues to be ongoing. And of course, the attempts of the state to make his life as miserable as possible certainly continues on a day-to-day basis. And we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Noelle Hanrahan, who's the founder and director of Prison Radio, where you can hear Mumia Abu-Jamal's commentaries. Noelle, thank you so much for being with us.
Glad to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. And you know, before we delve into some of what's happening with Mumia right now, you know, for those who maybe are less familiar of his case and how he ended up being trapped in prison for a number of decades, could you just give maybe a capsule view of who is Mumia Abu-Jamal and why has the U.S. government put him in prison for so many years?
Mumia Abu-Jamal is a brilliant journalist who practiced his trade in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the early 80s and 1970s. He was a trained broadcast journalist producing for NPR, Mutual Black Network, WHYY, and others. And he was targeted because he refused to not ask the difficult questions. He is very talented. So when he was arrested for the murder of a Philadelphia police officer, he was railroaded. It was an unfair trial. And I think the police knew who they had. They had a very articulate, dynamic African-American journalist who was holding the powerful accountable through his work. That's who Mumia Abu-Jamal is. Since he was arrested in 1981, he has continued to practice his journalism. He's written 13 books. The most recent was a trilogy called Murder Incorporated, Empire, Genocide, and Manifest Destiny, which is a real send-up of the United States imperialist agenda throughout history from its inception. So it was an amazing 3-volume series. He's now working on his PhD, studying Fanon, but he continues to practice as a journalist from inside. So he's been in for 41 years. And it's been my pleasure to work with him for many of those years. I began by pulling his first book out of prison, Live from Death Row, in 1994, and by placing his commentaries on National Public Radio. One of the marks of how good a journalist you are is by how the powerful target you. And Live from Death Row was targeted by none other than Bob Dole, who got up on the Senate floor and threatened NPR's funding for daring to air Mumia Abu-Jamal's broadcasts. At that point, he would have aired on 790 states in the U.S., Hungary, South Africa, and Canada. And every single person on NPR's All Things Considered was a bestseller in the New York Times. So they were threatened by his mere voice. Even from inside prison, they were threatened by what that could do if it were to make it outside.
In prison, over 42 years now. It's a very long time. He's been quite active inside, still doing journalism, and as a result has faced over these several decades behind bars, not only just being a political prisoner, but facing quite a bit of persecution. Can you talk about what he's had to endure throughout those several decades behind bars?
We exist in a place where they torture the people inside. And the people who have long sentences, or the people who are politically imprisoned, or people who are targeted by the state, often have much more difficult times. Mumia, for instance, for the first 8 years he was in, was denied visits and phone calls. And he wouldn't cut his hair. He had dreads. And so they punished him for that. After families protested, he was able to start getting visits and phone calls and do more writing. But he spent 8 years believing that he would be immediately released. He thought that was such a travesty. He had a judge, Albert Sabo, who said in the first week of the trial to a court reporter, "I'm going to help him fry the N-word." That's the kind of trial he had. And so he believed. I met him in year 11, and he believed he was getting out any day. It over the years became more clear that the state, once they have you, they're going to try and keep you. So he has faced serious issues. As we've been more more able to get his word out, the Pennsylvania State House passed a law called the Silencing Act, threatening to take away any violent, quote unquote, violent criminals' pencils, paper, and phone calls. And that Silencing Act, we had to go to court for, get a preliminary injunction, and we had to beat it. But it was a political tool, a tactic to try and take away people's ability to do work. I took a camera crew in to see Mumia 5 times, and then they prevented camera crews from going in to see prisoners. Now, they will have camera crews go in to do TED Talks, and they'll have them do puppy, taking care of puppies or something. But they cannot censor based on what people say. And so I think people should advocate for getting cameras in again. But he has faced a lot of repression. He was in a solitary confinement cell for 29 years. He had 7 books that he was allowed to keep in his cell at any one time. He was often very far from his family. Solitary confinement in 11 by 7 cell with 18 inches from the cell to the bar, and confined all the time over weekends. That was extreme. So he has faced a lot of extreme conditions, and also his health, because he's getting older, has deteriorated. So he's had significant health issues. 2017, he had hepatitis C, and they were denying him the cure. There was a cure, and they were denying it to him. So we had to go to court, get a preliminary injunction, and we won that, and we won it for many other prisoners around the country. He had double bypass surgery, heart condition, in 2021, and the prison now is denying him cardiac rehabilitation care. And that means he's not getting the right diet, and he doesn't get enough exercise. So he's got an extreme skin condition, eczema, that is raging, and it's very difficult for him to get treatment for. So he's, at this current time, right now, he's very weak. And we need to have all our bright, white, hot spotlight on both his criminal case, because he's very likely innocent and deserves a new trial and deserves immediate freedom, and because of his medical issues are so severe that he absolutely needs medical care that he likely can only receive on the outside.
And what is the status of where his criminal case is now? I mean, for those who follow this case, it's like, the avalanche of evidence that has come. I mean, not even just from the original trial, but it seems like, just year after year after year that I almost sometimes feel like I'm going crazy. Like, how are they not letting this man out of prison? There's so much information, but I know they keep finding ways to, deny it, push it off, do different things like that so that he doesn't have the opportunity to put most of this before a court in a real way. So where does that stand now?
We live in America, and in America, they have constructed the appeals process in the judiciary to preserve what they have done. So they have 30 years of incarcerating our mothers, fathers, cousins, our people, and they do not want to admit that mass incarceration, that over-incarceration targeted people of color and poor people. And so because of that, they are seeking to preserve the finality of all those convictions. So even if people are released based on police and prosecutorial misconduct, it's one at a time. It's not recognizing that they targeted everyone based on their race and class. And now they're trying to release them with that you need to prove things that are impossible to prove. But Mumia, in this case, and in some cases, he has direct evidence that they suppressed information and did not give it to his defense team. He has key evidence that they took blacks off the jury. So what they're doing is they're using these laws in Pennsylvania, the Post-Conviction Relief Act, to eliminate the ability of anyone, a judge, to examine the facts, the merits. So this last case he had in PCRA court, he had a document from a witness that said, "Where's my money?" right after the trial. So the witness, Robert Chobert, sent the DA a note saying, "Where's my money? I want to get paid for his testimony." Presumably it wasn't lunch money, it wasn't bus money, it wasn't, so, but they refused to even consider that evidence. And they just found it, they just released it. It's been buried for 40 years. They refused to consider it because they said that it wouldn't have overturned the conviction. which is impossible, frankly, because he was one of the only eyewitnesses. And he was likely paid. Robert Chobert, said his car was parked behind the officer's car. And the first photos from the Philadelphia Bulletin, which were also suppressed and not considered, show his cab wasn't there. Now, Robert Chobert, when he testified, they suppressed his parole, like he was on parole. And why they suppressed it is because they said it wasn't a crime of falsehood. He was convicted of throwing a Molotov cocktail into a school for pay. And he was driving an unlicensed cab. And he had asked the DA for help getting his license back. That's the kind of guy we're talking about. So, the fact that they've suppressed all this, every few years, some amazing evidence is found, and they find a way to argue that it should not be heard. And they don't argue it cumulatively either. So Pamela Demby, a judge, said that if Albert Sabo said, even if it were true, I'm going to help him fry the N-word in the first week of the trial, that it wouldn't have affected his rulings, and it wouldn't have affected the outcome of the jury's verdict. So that is the way in which this class of people who are judges and former prosecutors, I would say Krasner is slightly better, our new prosecutor is slightly better, but the whole system wants to preserve what it did. Now the 45,000 people who are in prison, the 1,500 juvenile lifers, the 5,000 people with life sentences. And we have a vast array of corruption from the police department. These are Frank Rizzo's descendants. These are the sons of Rizzo. This is a majority white police force, 6,500 majority white police force who are banking on overtime from arresting poor people to pay their Jersey mortgages, to get the pay bump when they retire. So they are all about commodifying people, taking their votes. Like if a felon gets arrested and they get sent to prison upstate in the rural areas, they keep their representation. They actually get more Congress people because they have prisoners there. And when they come home, they don't get it back. They keep it. They are stripping people of money. They've taken a huge number of people out of our community. And it's it's a capitalist agenda. It's a plan. It's like, if you can't provide work and food for everyone, you need to be able to control the workforce and the labor pool. And if you want to privilege the white lower middle class by giving them these jobs, as police officers, that's a way of, running the system in a way that it separates people and stigmatizes certain people. And Mumia is a man. He's one man. He's caught up in this agenda, and he was willing to expose it. He still is.
I think it's all really important to reflect on that, especially as we talk about Julian Assange and the persecution going on in that case. I mean, there are so many political prisoners, not just the ones they're trying to extradite to the US, but already in the US. And so my question for you becomes, what are the options now? I mean, I guess legally speaking, right? Like, are there options to try to get him released given the situation with his health?
I think that Kevin Rashid Johnson, who's also a political prisoner in the United States and a gifted writer and a gifted artist, said about Mumia, he's not free because we're not free. So the options are building our power. And it is happening in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. It is a moment where we are literally building power. So the Abolitionist Law Center, the Amistad Law Project, Human Rights Coalition, the families of people inside have built from the inside out. And they elected two members of the city council who are Working Families Party members, stone cold abolitionists. They elected Krasner. They've been appointed. Salim Holbrook from the Abolitionist Law Center has been appointed to be the Josh Shapiro's transition team, our governor. They are crushing it, and it's happening right now. It's also happening at a time where the U.S. is expanding its imperial agendas and also crushing people at home. So it's not easy, but I have a feeling that the people at least where I live in Pennsylvania, are on fire. And they're making us pay a price. I mean, they're destabilizing our communities, you know. And so I think, yes, what are our options to build power? Our options are to build power. Mumia Abu-Jamal will be free when we have the power and when we confront power. They can turn the key. They always do. When they need to, when they decide it's in their best interest, they just turn the key. He should be freed. They will find a way to free Mumia when we have the power.
No, I think it's a very well taken point, and it's a good example when we look at, Northern Ireland, this Palestinian struggle, political prisoners being linked to the real struggle on the ground is what makes a difference. Well, as always, Noelle, we really appreciate you coming on and helping inform people about all of these different pieces. Hope everyone is checking out Prison Radio on a regular basis. But as always, Noelle Hanrahan, founder and director of Prison Radio, thanks so much for being with us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you. Appreciate it.